Hi, everyone. I'm so grateful you're joining us today. We're going to have a great discussion about whether education is on the cusp of a revolution, which I think is quite pertinent to the days we're in right now. I'm going to start by addressing my first question to Rhonda. Has the pandemic permanently shifted education online, or do you see this as temporary?
Well, I want to say that the short answer is no. It has not permanently shifted all of post-secondary education online, nor would we want that to happen. Our students uniformly tell us about how they value in-person instruction. And I think it's really important to remember that this is an incredibly important formative time in the lives of young people. And it's about not just the curricular, but the co-curricular, the extracurricular. Having said that, will we be going back to simply the way it was before? No. I think that we were already on a path. Back into 2010, York already was well established along this path of moving toward a blended format where students had all the benefits of in-person, some programming like studios, labs, science, arts, nursing, very difficult to have all of those student learning outcomes met by online. But we combine all of that hands-on, shifting to doing more problem-based learning in our classes as well as off campus in work integrated learning, and make lectures increasingly available through online. So we'll have a whole range of courses, some fully online, some blended, some still which have a large in-person component. I think that's where we're going in the future.
Matt, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Do you see this shift to online being permanent or temporary?
Yeah, and maybe I'd change the nomenclature to, instead of online, I'd call it digital, because I think digital transformation absolutely is going to happen. I think when folks hear the words online, it connotes that we're all going to be in our homes or in our college dorms or apartments and not interacting physically with a tutor or a teacher. I don't think that's going to happen in full force, but I do think digital transformation is absolutely going to happen across all the different educational sectors. Because when we say education, it's really elementary, middle to high school, college, and a continuing education. And I think there's going to be rapid digital transformation across all those different verticals. Because I think the inevitable goal here is we want the highest outcomes for the learner at the best value. And when we look at some of the different verticals, like take elementary, for example, United States, 2/3 of kids by the time they get to third grade are still reading below grade level, and it continues on to 8th grade. And that's been happening for 30 years. And so I think the definition of insanity in this case is let's continue to do the same thing and expect the different results. And I think that digital transformation can absolutely make a big difference both in equality and equity in terms of how we think about lowering the cost of delivery of education to have the broadest outcome of learners around the world.
You mentioned the learning journey, which I think is such an important topic to bring up. And it brings me to my next question, which is how are we going to use technology to make sure we improve equity and access so everyone has a learning journey that allows them to grow and learn and succeed? Matt, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think that, I can speak to the United States, and we have at Rosetta Stone about half our business now is selling software into K-12 schools. And so we have a unique perspective in the use of technology to address equity and equality, and it's a huge issue. I mean, it's one thing to provide laptops to every student in a school. It's the other to provide equitable support for those students that may not have the understanding or the prowess or the aptitude to understand how to use those laptops. And I think for us, it starts with, and our strong belief is in everything, it starts with reading, because if you deal with reading as a young student, it opens up so many different doors. 85% of curriculum is delivered via reading. If you have low reading scores, it has profound societal and personal impacts to students. And so when I get this question a lot, I typically go back to, okay, how do we solve the reading issue around the world? And I think the way that we think about it is there are things that are not taught in a specific way for young learners that can be flagged and corrected very, very quickly. The amount of, for example, high school dropouts rapidly increases if you don't know how to read. And unfortunately, it's affected very distinctly and acutely in different local and states that have funding that are not perpetuated to the best outcomes, meaning the poorest cities get the poorest outcomes because they don't get the proper funding, because most of the United States educational system is powered by local and state taxes. And so the way we think about the way to deal with this is using technology to start flagging and asserting ourselves with the teacher so that we can use technology and teachers in conjunction with the practice of learning. If we can get young learners reading better and more proficiently, we'll stop these fundamental downstream effects that we see today that are incredibly unfair, especially a poignant discussion today. You know, for example, I'm a dyslexic. I was fortunate enough to have an EL teacher that knew exactly what my specific issue is with phonemic awareness. I can't imagine what that would be like if I was in an urban city and I didn't have a teacher that knew the science of reading and knew how to actually change the glide slope of my life. And so we start with, how do you insert assessment and technology so that you can enable the teacher to provide very good instruction? If we can solve reading, I think we can solve a lot of these societal problems.
And Rhonda, many institutions, including York, have shifted to online learning because of what's happening in the world. You know, your institution itself, it welcomes students from across the city, across the country, around the world. How do you see technology helping, you know, progress equity and accessibility during these times?
Yeah, you know, I want to say that the higher education institutions in Canada are one of our richest resources. We are known for having very high quality education, and it's attractive not only for our domestic students, but for students around the world. And Canada has been increasingly receiving applications from around the world. We're heading into a situation where 2/3 of all emerging jobs require higher education. Somewhere around 50% of all current jobs are being directly impacted by automation and AI. It is increasingly difficult to do well in the world if you do not have access to some higher education. And we are committed to not leaving any talent behind. We have an incredibly diverse student population, and they learn in very different ways. We understand that very well now. Some students are going to learn better in an in-person environment, and they're going to be, you know, attracted to that. Other students using technology to enhance their learning so that we have much more flexible learning is incredibly valuable. Just one example, we've created a perpetual course as a pilot right now, and then we're going to be looking into that as a model, where students can actually hop on and off of a perpetual course at their own speed, and the materials will keep on repeating. We're using a whole technology to introduce a Watson-designed student advising system that's all online. That doesn't mean that students won't be able to access an in-person advising, but for so many different questions that students have or need those kinds of aids, again, we're using technology. So the entire way in which higher education is moving now is understanding the value of complementing what we do on our campuses with that introduction of technology, both on campus and off campus.
So when it comes to the university, it's increasing the ways that students can connect with either teachers or those who can provide assistance. That's how you're using technology to improve equity and access.
Access the materials, chat with one another, to how they interact with the professor. We have some courses now where the students and the professor are actually creating additional content for the course because they're contributing resources that they find onto this whole online environment. I mean, that's just one example of what is happening now. So you're really shifting learning to a kind of a flipped learning model, where much more time through technology is being made available to do inquiry-based hands-on learning, because the resources, the lecture materials, much of that can be made available through the use of technology.
And so, and Arne, that brings me to you. How are your thoughts, you know, what are your thoughts on when it comes to improving equity and access during using technology during these times? I mean, your business again is based online, so I feel like that would be your sweet spot.
Yeah, thanks. And we do, without any false humility, see that as one of our sweet spots. I think companies like Babbel and like Rosetta Stone have already improved equity and access to education by enlarging the language learning market, by allowing an easier entry. I mean, where Babbel is available in 190 plus countries at the push of a button. Where we offer the same high quality language learning services to anyone, whether you're in a rural countryside environment or in a big city environment, whether you're in a well-funded district with a well-funded high school, or the opposite, like Matt just said, or for better or worse, the color of your skin or which continent you live on, right? So we're already seeing that happen. We're already seeing a larger market, a more equitable education market, and we see the current pandemic has kind of torn down the walls between institutional learning and online learning, and very much intend to make sure that the final outcome is a more equitable outcome.
And so you mentioned that the pandemic has kind of torn down the walls that once existed when it came to education. How do you see online learning, I guess, progressing over time? I mean, it's a really hard question because no one can predict the future. But if you had to guess, what trends or what do you think online learning will look like?
Yeah, and I'll take out my magic wand and skip all the usual suspects like AI and real-time translation and the mega trends of mobility and accessibility and self-optimization. I think that, to me, that's tech gibberish. Everyone says that. Very few people are actually good at it. To me, the real step change will come when we actually either get you to learn or keep you learning. That's the two user challenges that we need to crack to improve education or learning worldwide. So to me, it's actually teaching young students how to learn. How do I learn as Arne, and what does that journey look like? And that brings me back to the orchestrating learning journeys. In school, your teacher does that for you. In university, your professor does it for you. Your first language trip is usually decided by your parents. So you're 25 by the time you actually start learning something on your own voluntarily. Just painting a very black and white picture. We know how to buy a car before we know how to learn a language. So the challenge really will be, how do we connect the different services, again, trying not to fall into the online, offline, digital, or traditional trap, and make sure that we serve the user where the user is naive or blind.
Makes sense. And I know we're running out of time. Rhonda, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
I have to say, I'd really like to see the evidence on that. People keep on referring to online or digital as somehow being less expensive. You want high quality learning, and you want that combined with experiential education, work integrated learning. I'm not convinced, but I want to say that the points that have been made about lifelong learning are incredibly important. And we know that mature workers are going to be needing to access, upgrading, reskilling. Technology can hugely help that. But it's not only about the method of delivery, it's about the content. The number of programs that we're now offering that deal with the impact of technology on what's happening in the labor market, from machine learning, data analytics, cybersecurity, and so forth. So it's also about the programming. And we continue to support those mature workers and also our students through expanded technology and professional development and continuing studies and entrepreneurship. We have our Hulett School of Business right now that has 50 of their students supporting businesses and helping them learn how to go online, how to manage e-commerce. That's all being done through digital supports. So I see that we are going to continue to enrich learning through digitization, through different types of online instruction. But I also see that in-person instruction that happens both in our classes and with our partners. We have a great partnership with Shopify. Our students spend 50% of their time in Shopify. 50% of their time in classrooms. This is the way of the future, this blended, flipped kind of classroom that uses technology in combination with face-to-face when possible.
And I'm sure we could continue talking forever. And this topic, of course, is not going to go away anytime soon. But unfortunately, we're out of time. So thank you all for sitting down with me and for chatting about this. Hopefully, we'll be able to do this again next year.
Thank you. It was fun.